In case you actually think that the PC master race is above the console fanboys on an intellectual level, just remember that there are plenty of people in the PC master race, in the PC gaming community, that actually believe that piracy and used games are the same thing in terms of their negative impact on the gaming industry. That one action is equal to the other. Because whenever people criticize something about the PC industry, about the PC gaming industry, one thing that is often brought up is piracy, and rightfully so. Piracy is a big problem. The developers ends up not not getting money from their game, and people are just they're entitled. They think that they deserve to get the game for free without paying for the game at all. And when people bring that up, that hey, one objective flaw about how open the PC gaming market is and how open source it is that it's much easier to pirate games on the PC than it is on consoles, because the console is a closed platform. And usually, typically, if you pirate a game, they have software that can detect that, and you get banned. You get console banned. So they have much more piracy protection software on the console than they do on the PC. And when people bring that up, PC gamers tend to deflect and say, well, instead of acknowledging the problem, they just say, well, oh, well, look at used games in the console industry. It's the exact same thing. And yeah, unfortunately, there are people who are stupid enough to actually hold that position, which is why this video is necessary. Oh man, where should I start? There are plenty of reasons as to why this logic is completely flawed. Where should I start? The first reason, and this is a pretty significant one actually, when you think of the impact on the gaming industry as in creation of jobs, money being flowed into it, and all that stuff. Yeah, jobs. That's the first thing that I could think of. What jobs do piracy create? What jobs are created by torrent sites and pirates? What is the contribution to the economy and to the industry that torrenting and piracy brings compared to the used game industry, to the used game market, where you buy a game and that money is used to create jobs, to create thousands of jobs across the world. So that's already one reason why you can never compare those two, one to another, that somehow one thing is just as bad as the other. Or, there are even some people who are stupid enough to think that used games are worse, or even worse than piracy. Those are just those are just people who are so stupid that they honestly can't be saved. But, yeah, jobs are actually being created in the used game market. No jobs at all are being created with piracy. So that's, and you could say whatever you want about GameStop, about how awful GameStop is and how awful it treats their employees and, blah, 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 blah. But that's pretty much irrelevant. That's irrelevant because at the end of the day, jobs are still being created, and that's an objective benefit that is being brought to the industry. That is an objective benefit of used games, is the creation of jobs, and that is always good in any industry, is job creation. Okay, so that's the first thing. And the second thing is kind of what I was alluding to before. Yeah, people are actually spending money or willing to pay for a game compared to pirates who are just entitled and they think they deserve everything for free. People who buy used games, they actually buy something. People who just go on torrent sites and download games illegally, that's what they're doing. That's it. I mean, can you that's another thing. Can you honestly compare someone who buys something to someone who just downloads something for free? So that's another reason why that whole logic is flawed. The comparison between used games and piracy. That's number 2. Number 3 is the issue of replication. Okay, so obviously pirate copies come from legitimate copies of games, right? So let's say I have a legitimate copy of, let's say, what's some random game that I could think about? Let's say I have a legitimate copy of Call of Duty on the PC. I mean, it's, kind of, no one really gives a shit about Call of Duty on PC, but it's just an example I could think of. Okay. And then I put that on a torrent site. I ripped the file and I put it on uTorrent, I put it on Pirate Bay, whatever website is around where people pirate their games from. Okay, that is one legitimate copy, and then people can replicate that 10,000 plus times. There's an infinite amount of times that you can download that game. Compared to if I own a legitimate copy of Call of Duty on the PlayStation 4, a physical copy, that is the one copy. And the only way you can't replicate that game onto the disc and just replicate it 10,000 plus times like you could do with like bootleg DVDs and bootleg CDs. It's kind of an obscure reference because that's kind of not really a thing anymore. The bootleg movie market and those kind of things. These are legitimate copies we're talking about here. There's really no such thing as like bootleg discs. That, at least in the current generation. Maybe in previous generations you had plenty of bootlegs, like in the PS1 era, but in this era, that's not the case. You had bootleg Game Boy games and you had bootleg other games, but in terms of used games, that's what we're talking about, used games. You can't just replicate that game. No, that is the one game that you transfer ownership to another person, as opposed to piracy, where you have the game, you're not transferring your ownership to anybody, and you are just enabling thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people to download that one copy for free. So that's the third reason why comparing piracy to buying a used game is flawed. So that's the third reason, and this is kind of in addition to what I just said. In the case of used games, okay, this is reason number 4. In the case of used games, a developer has already made money. They have already profited from the sales of that game. So let's say a game sells 1 million copies, right? They have made the money from those 1 million copies, right? So the idea that one is just as harmful to the developer as the other is flawed. This is in addition to the replication argument that I made. Is that one, you're just infinitely replicating a copy of a game, and the other is you're transferring ownership of one legitimate copy from one owner to another. So reason number 4 is in addition to that, in that if you are selling a game, the legitimate copy, someone who sells the legitimate copy of the game, they sell it because they no longer want that game, okay? They don't want it anymore. They obviously don't want to play it anymore, whatever. And what I was saying earlier is that in the case of piracy, when someone uploads a game to Pirate Bay, their copy of the game to Pirate Bay, they are not giving up their ownership of that game. They're not. They still retain ownership of that game while allowing other people to illegally own that game. So what I'm saying is that in this case, when a game sells 1 million copies on console, they already made the money, and the people who bought the game do not want the game anymore. So what's the alternative then? When you have a physical copy of a game, if you don't want it anymore, you just leave it on your shelf to collect dust, or just throw it in the garbage, and it's just useless now. Or you can sell the game to somebody else, to GameStop, to whatever other party, and it ends up contributing to the economy and actually doing something instead of just sitting there. You have no intention to play the game anymore, because those are the people who sell the game. People who have no intention to ever play the game ever again. Okay, so that's reason number 4 as to why you can't even compare piracy to used games. Because people make the argument, well, it's the same exact thing for developers, because developers, they don't make money from used game sales. No, they don't make money from used game sales, but they do make money from the original. They had made money from that game sale before. The original copy of that game was sold, and the developer received the profits for that. So no, that's you can't. Okay, I have one more reason. If those four reasons weren't convincing enough, then here's reason number five. Okay. The seller, the person who sells the game to, their friend, their family member, especially to GameStop, because when you sell a game to GameStop, you usually get in-store credit. You don't actually get a lump sum of cash. So typically what happens when a used game is sold, the person who sells the game and gets the proceeds from that sale, they typically, in a lot of most cases, they end up spending that money and using that and pouring that money back into the gaming industry. So GameStop is a perfect example of this, okay? I sell my copy of Call of Duty to GameStop and I get X amount of dollars, or I sell like 20 games to GameStop and I get X amount of dollars for that. What I end up doing, because I'm getting store credit, I end up pouring that money back into the gaming industry. Let's say GameStop sells some neat accessories for my game console or for my game, or they sell controllers and they sell other games. Obviously, since I'm getting store credit, I'm going to have to spend that money for using, to buy other shit, to buy other gaming products. So that's another reason why you can't compare, because that's another benefit that used games bring to the industry, is that instead of the game, just lying around and nothing happening of it, the seller can actually sell the game and pour the money back into the gaming industry. So, I'm sure I could think of other reasons, but those are like the five main ones I could think of as to why you really can't compare. You can't compare the two at all. To say that one action is just as bad as the other, or that even to try to allude that used games are worse. Because if you're pirating a game, you never intended on buying the game in the first place. But that just kind of proves my point. You never intended on buying the game in the first place, so you decide that you're entitled to have the game anyway, and the developer never makes money. That's kind of a flawed argument, because you're implying that used games are just as bad when the developer actually had made money from the game prior to the game being sold to a third party, when it's used. But in the case of piracy, they never made money at all. So to compare those two is a very flawed thing. It's a very flawed argument, and it just demonstrates that people who think that aren't intellectually above the likes of JTech TV and those other console fanboys that they all like to make videos on. Yet you look at their logic and they're no better. The likes of Bullet Barry, Top Hats, and Rags, and those people who I actually do have respect for as individuals. They're great people. But if you look at the structure of their logic, they are honestly no better. They like to pull this facade that they are intellectually superior to these people that they make fun of. But are they really? They're obviously better human beings, because they don't do false copyright strikes and all that other shit that, JTech does and the PlayStation Legion does. But they are still not, if you actually, on an intellectual level, they're not much higher. I'm sorry, but it's true.